a lecture theatre, it lends itself to answering questions and immediately looking for responses, doesn't it? Thanks very much indeed for coming out, everybody, particularly on, I think, what is our first winter evening. And I've tried to convince these two guys all day that this is unusual weather for what we've been having in Ireland over the last week, that actually we've had like 15-degree temperatures. They don't believe a word. Please assure them that I haven't been telling lies all day. This is the first cold day of the year, and I think the first properly cold day we've had in a couple of weeks, so thanks very much indeed for coming out. My name is Colm O'Gorman. I'm the Executive Director of Amnesty International here in Ireland, and on behalf of Amnesty I just want to once again thank First Fortnight, JP and all of the gang again for inviting us to be part of this fantastic festival. It's the second time that we've partnered with First Fortnight over the last couple of years, and we're delighted to be back again. As you know, First Fortnight is Ireland's first mental health arts festival. It's held, obviously, hence the name, in the first 2 weeks of every year, and it's now in its fourth year. First Fortnight combines music, art, film, comedy, drama and discussion to challenge mental health prejudice and discrimination in what I think you'll agree are exciting and innovative ways. And if you've had a look at the programme, I think this year's festival is truly astounding and a real testament to the work that the guys have done over the last couple of years. As part of this year's programmes of event, Amnesty International Ireland has teamed up for the second time with First Fortnight, this time to present this very special discussion. Please, can you make some noise for mental health? The point of this evening's discussion really is to offer a platform for our two panellists who have experience of mental health problems to discuss their own experiences and programmes of work they've been involved with to challenge the prejudice and discrimination that we know surrounds the whole area or issue of mental health generally. A little bit of background to Amnesty International's work. We've been working in the area of mental health and human rights since late 2003. And when we started working in the area, we came across a huge number of questions about why amnesty and why mental health. People weren't making that link at all, that mental health might be a human rights issue, which, to be perfectly frank, was one of the reasons why we thought we should definitely get involved. Simply by Amnesty talking about mental health, it raised those questions, and we thought that those were questions that we needed to start to address. But in fact, as I'm sure everybody here knows, mental health is very much a human rights issue. And the fact that up until, I suppose, the last 10 years or so, not only here in Ireland, but perhaps internationally, it hasn't been considered as such, is at the heart of why so many of the long-term problems that have existed for so long persist. I mean, in the most basic sense, if you think about it, mental health, it's the only health issue that in certain circumstances can lead to you being denied your liberty. And we're very familiar with that concept in Ireland. I remember listening to an interview with Mary Rafferty, actually poignantly given on the morning after she had died, the investigative journalist who was talking about her work on the film series Behind the Walls, where she pointed out that Ireland led the world in locking people up. That at one point in our rather inglorious history in that regard, we were locking up more people than any other country on the planet, and that only the Soviet Union came a somewhat distant second to us. So we have a very particular history here in Ireland in failing to understand or address mental health from a human rights perspective, and very real issues around failing to respect the human rights of people who are experiencing or who do experience mental health problems generally. In Ireland, our mental health laws are not in line with human rights standards, and that's something we've been working hard to change over the last number of years. But beyond that whole question of law and legislation and policy, which is obviously key to what Amnesty International is about, those kind of failures at a state level really are underpinned by broader societal attitudes held by individuals that underpin or tolerate or permit state failures in the broader sense. And what really damages people's lives then are the attitudes and behaviours of others. Throughout the world, people with mental health problems face persistent and pervasive discrimination, resulting in the denial of their human rights and profound social and economic exclusion. And one of the key points that we've been really interested in engaging with others on, and those experts by experience who've really informed our campaigning work over the last 5 years or more in particular, talk about, is how that, unlike concepts like racism or ageism, there is no ism to describe discrimination on the grounds of mental health. We don't consider the levels of prejudice or discrimination that people experience through the ism lens or perspective. And in and of itself, that reflects, I think, a failure to recognise that we are talking about prejudice that underpinned people's real experiences of discrimination on a daily basis. And we have to start to challenge that. From research that we commissioned with over 300 people who had had experience of mental health problems in Ireland, research that we commissioned back in 2010, we found that nearly every participant, I think about 96% of participants, reported some level of unfair treatment due to a mental health problem, and the vast majority indicated that this had caused them, understandably enough, significant distress. Large numbers reported being treated unfairly in so many key aspects of their lives, like finding and keeping jobs, accessing education, housing and social welfare. But perhaps most shockingly, negative attitudes and treatment were most prevalent in social and personal relationships. So it was at the level of individual and personal relationships that people reported experiencing the gravest level of unfair treatment. And while there was no clear evidence of overt, direct discrimination by the state in its laws, policies or practice, the research did paint a very, very vivid and clear picture of the indirect discrimination and inequality that people face every day. And if you couple that with the fact that we know that people with mental health problems, for instance, have lower employment rates and are more likely to have left education early, that clearly suggests that the reported unfair treatment from the research is having a very real impact on people's lives. Beyond that research then, every 5 years the National Disability Authority surveys the Irish population about their attitudes toward people with disabilities generally. And its latest research, which was published last January, and those of you who are familiar with that will know that in many ways actually attitudes over the last couple of years have hardened, and that attitudes towards people with mental health problems really remains very, very worrying. People, for instance, are less comfortable either working with or living near someone with a mental health problem than with any other form of disability. Only just over half of people believe that people with mental health problems should have a sexual relationship. Just over half of people believe that it's acceptable for somebody with a mental health problem to have a sexual relationship. Nearly a quarter of people would object if children with mental health problems were in the same class as their children. Only 1 in 5 wouldn't object. 2 in 5, that's 40% of people, agree that children with mental health difficulties should be able to attend mainstream schools, which was only slightly more than those who disagreed. So 37% of people disagreed with the idea that children experiencing mental health problems should be able to attend mainstream schools. And for me, this is, the last one really is, I think, profoundly shocking. Just under a third, 32% of people think people with mental health problems shouldn't have children. 38% think that they should be allowed to have children. But 32%, almost a third of people in Ireland, believe that if you have a mental health problem, you shouldn't be allowed to have children. So if you just consider how deep-seated that kind of prejudice and intolerance at the level of individual attitudes is, it really then demonstrates how the low political priority, the lack of regard that we've seen historically in Ireland to the whole area of mental health when it comes to political decision making, public policy, law, resource allocation, hasn't come from nowhere. It's underpinned by a lack or a failure at the level of us as individual members of society to understand and recognise the reality of people living with mental health difficulties, and not to other them so absolutely that we either institutionalise them or decide that they're somehow less than human with the full range of rights of other people. So what we all have a job to do then is to challenge this particular hidden ism, and you'll have seen over the last couple of years hopefully some of the work that we've been doing in our marketing campaigns, etc., try to challenge some of that. So tonight this discussion really is part of that conversation, because the place where individual attitudes change is at the level of engagement and conversation. And I think one thing that we know here in Ireland, that there's nothing as powerful as somebody talking from their own lived experience to begin to challenge attitudes that on the whole that are discriminatory, that do demonstrate prejudice and intolerance towards other people. So, and one of the major contributing factors to the prejudice around mental health is the silence around the issue. And I think we can all be pleased with the progress that we've made in Ireland over the last number of years, where finally mental health is an issue of real public discourse and real public discussion, and we have an awful lot more to do in that regard. That's part of what we want to try to achieve tonight. Too often mental health as an issue is kept behind closed doors and people are discouraged from talking about it. You can understand why, given the level of prejudice that exists, if you think about the attitudes we revealed, that the research revealed earlier on, and yet at the same time, if we don't begin to talk about this experience, how do we challenge that level of prejudice. That's what tonight is about. Our event tonight aims to reverse that particular trend by shining a spotlight again on this issue and encouraging people to make as much noise as possible on the subject. It's something that affects all of us. It's part of the experience of being human, and we need to bring it out into the open and create better understanding and support. It's not simply about this concept of destigmatizing a concept. It's about humanizing the reality of people's lived experiences, humanizing the reality of the struggles that we all face, and seeing them as part of life, as something that we need to address and to find a way through. And with that in mind, we're delighted tonight to introduce, and I'm really honoured to be introducing, two extremely inspiring, talented and brave individuals who are booking the trend internationally. They're speaking out about their own experiences and supporting others to make real strides in the battle against mental health prejudice and discrimination. We're delighted tonight to welcome actor and director Joe Pantoliano and British artist and curator Stuart Semple. So the format for the evening is each of our speakers is going to, each of our panelists is going to speak for a little while. We'll then open up a little bit of a conversation here, and then what we all three of us really want to do is open this up into a very broad conversation with you. So this is we hope to see this as a really lively conversation within the room tonight. So I'm going to introduce Joe first of all. Joe Pantoliano, in many ways, of course, needs no introduction. He was born in Hoboken, New Jersey. And after appearing on several sitcoms and TV movies, he had a role in Risky Business in 1983. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, he was one of Hollywood's busiest actors. In 2001, he joined the cast of HBO's hit dramatic series The Sopranos as Ralphie, for which he earned an Emmy in 2003. He's also featured in films such as The Goonies, The Matrix, Memento, Midnight Run, Bad Boy 1 and 2, The Fugitive, and frankly countless others. We'd be here all night if I started to list them all off. In 2005, Joey revealed that he'd been living with depression for over a decade. Subsequently, he set up a foundation, No Kidding Me Too, to fight the prejudice against mental health problems. And in 2010, he produced a documentary tracing the life stories of what he called 7 messengers of hope and their experiences of mental health problems, also entitled No Kidding Me Too. Joey.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you. Thank you, Amnesty, for inviting me. And Fortnight, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know that the first 2 weeks of the new year is a fortnight. You know, that every 14 days is a fortnight. Yeah. You learn something every day. You may say I'm crazy.
Separate.
You know what? I'd gotten so ill that it got to a point where I didn't want to live anymore, and I was flabbergasted by the idea that I no longer wanted to live. It was in finding out that I had what my doctor described as a disease of the soul, that I wasn't alone, that it could be fixed, and that it wasn't my fault, you know. I was given a choice by him that we could work on delving into where this disease came from, because historically, mental illness is got three prongs to it. It can be genetic, it's environmental certainly, and a lot of it has to do with spirituality and liking, you know, feeling like you have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. That this problem was in me, it was my fault, and I had to fix it. And if I couldn't fix it, I was too weak to be able to fix it, and shame on me for having it. I never felt that way when the doctor told me that I had to take a statin for my cholesterol levels. I've never heard anybody say, Joey Pants has got high cholesterol and he's taking medication for it. You know, so the idea of why there would be a discussion about someone that might take a medicine to regulate and manage my sanity on a daily basis. You know, what I learned was that I was behaving I had a disease, and symptomatically, I had 7 deadly symptoms that were born out of that. An eating disorder, I got fat. I started starving myself to lose weight, and that produced a feeling of euphoria. I started shopping to dress nice because clothes made a demand, and when I couldn't afford the clothes, I started shoplifting. And that produced an enormous amount of excitement that I might be able to walk through that door and get away with something. I was treating my depression with alcohol and Vicodin and cheating on my wife. I was trying to alter my feelings at every turn. I felt bad. I wanted not to feel bad, so whatever was available I would do in the hopes that it would go away. And all of this was kind of unconscious. So after I saw my doctor and he told me that I could get better, and I started to get better, and I went back to work, and I saw a doc, and it was for insurance because to do a movie you have to be insured when you're a principal player, and he asked me some questions, and I've done this 80 times, but this time when he got around to the question of, do you have a history of heart disease, do you have a history of cancer, do you smoke, do you drink, I told him, no, don't smoke, I'm not drinking, and what are you taking, what medicine do you take? Well, I take 10 milligrams of statin for cholesterol and a baby aspirin, and now I'm taking 10 milligrams of an antidepressant. And the insurance company called my lawyer 3 days later to say that I was an insurance risk, and they wouldn't insure me because they were afraid that I might have a breakdown. They were going to do me a favor, that if I signed a waiver saying that they were indemnified from my collapse, if it happened, that I would be financially responsible for work lost or time stopped during the making of the movie, which meant that after 3 hours I would be virtually destitute at $200,000 an hour to make a movie, right? So I said, this is unfair, I'm going to say something. Around this time, too, I was doing this movie called Canvas, and people kept asking me, they see in a airport, hey, Joey, how you doing? And I said, well, we're okay, what are you working on? Well, I'm working on a movie about Canvas. What's it about? Well, it's about a family that is affected by oncoming mental disease and how they're treated and how embarrassed they are by it. And I kept hearing these people say, no kidding, me too, my brother has. No kidding, me too, my mother. And that's where I came up with the idea of calling this organization No Kidding Me Too. Because the minute you talk about it, you find out that somebody else has it. Once a person just opens up to talk about what's going on with them, it kind of allows it to happen, So I learned that I had to surrender to the diseasiness that lived inside of me, to embrace it and to live through it. And I changed negative behaviors like drinking and drugs, and I found yoga, and I found walking, and I found ways, taking steam or going for a swim that got me right-minded in the same way that the negative behaviors stopped working. That's pretty much what's going on with me. What's going on here in this country as it pertains to the discrimination, bigotry, and shame that surrounds any form of mental uneasiness needs to be stopped. We need to talk about our mental state like we would talk about a common cold, because it's temporary. Most symptoms like schizophrenia can be treated, and if you surrender to it, you can get upwards of 80% of your life back. It's not forever, it's not permanent, nothing is. You have good days, you have bad days. The idea is to find that emotional umbrella that will protect you when the rain comes. That's all I got.
Do a best to start. scribbling away, so I'll come back to it in a moment and see what happens. So our other distinguished guest, I haven't used that phrase as it was here, so I'll come there. Our other panellist is Stuart Semple. Stuart Semple's works can be found in major international collections, including the Getty, Langan, David Roberts, and the Arcos Foundations. And he exhibited recently at the Goss Michael Foundation on the walls of One Hyde Park. He's held successful solo exhibitions in Italy, Hong Kong, London, and New York, and has been well received during international art fairs, extraordinarily well received, I should add, during international art fairs, including Art Basel in Miami, Hong Kong Art Fair, Frieze, and Art Chicago. He's also featured across the media, including the BBC, Esquire, the Art newspaper, Vogue, The Telegraph, Observer, ID, and Art Review. So we've two very distinguished artists on our panel this evening. After experiencing a traumatic near-death experience at the age of 19, Stuart found catharsis through his work and produced over 3,000 pictures by the age of 21, so in a period of 2 years, which he sold via eBay. Since selling his early work to Debbie Harry and being persuaded to move to London by the legendary art dealer Anthony Dufay, Semple went on, Stuart, Semple is an awful way to describe it. Stuart went on, I'm reading literally here, Stuart went on to create his seminal performance Happy Cloud from London's Tate Modern, in which he flooded the London skyline with thousands of pink smiley clouds at the height of the recession. And I have to say, even the image of it makes me want to laugh out loud. All of you are familiar with London, the position of the Tate Modern. You can just imagine pink smiley clouds wafting their way down recession London towards the financial district. Recently, Stuart initiated a grant fund within the mental health charity Mind, through which he hopes others experiencing mental health distress might enjoy the benefits that creativity has awarded him. Curating the exhibition and fundraiser Mindful, hosted by Stephen Fry and Lord Melvin Bragg. He's also founded the Auburn Gallery, a 3,000 square foot art space in East London, which is dedicated to nurturing new British talent. He's passionate about music, and Stuart has collaborated with Lady Gaga, The Prodigy, and The Future Heads.
Thank you for coming to talk about this. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I think that mental health, to start with, has an awful lot of discrimination around it just as a term. You know, we talk about physical health and we picture people in the gym, we picture people eating 5 vegetables a day, not smoking and not drinking. We talk about mental health and we instantly have different connotations in our mind. So we've got our work cut out from the start, I think. But one of the things I've decided that I need to do at this stage is talk about what I've been through. As a way to hopefully encourage other people to do that. So I very much do still suffer from my anxiety disorder. Some days are better than others, and as Camilla will tell you on the plane, I had a bit of a freak out coming here, and luckily I had my sketchbook to hand and I doodled, and you know, that's my medicine, and it really helps me. So I'm going to tell you my story, and it's not the easiest thing to do, so sort of, I'll do my best. I haven't said it much, but it started really when I went to university, and I made a stupid decision to move as far away from my parents as I could. So I moved from Bournemouth all the way up north to Bretton Hall in the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, and I felt so isolated, and I felt so homesick. And I was a teenager in the middle of the field with nothing. I couldn't relate to anybody, I didn't know where I was, I just wanted to go home. And I started to have panic attacks at that point. I didn't know what they were, I didn't really know how to reach out to anybody. I didn't want to tell my teachers I was suffering, and I very quietly went to a little counsellor on the campus who didn't really help me very much. And then one weekend I went home to visit my family, and it was really weird. I sort of had a sense something bad would happen if I went down there. Anyway, on my way down I had the most horrendous allergic reaction to something. I don't know what it was. My lips were huge, I couldn't breathe. And I literally flopped on my mother's doorstep, and she took me to hospital, and she hadn't seen me for a real state. And they put me in the ward, and tried to look after me, but none of the drugs that they normally give you worked. They tried everything, you know. And one morning at about 3 in the morning, I had this bright idea that they'd give me this plasma that would heal me, because it had some chemical in it that would fix everything. And I was allergic to it. And, you know, I had hives on my skin, and then I got a rash between the hives. It was that bad. And you know, earlier on that day, they basically said they didn't think they could really help me, and I should sort of say my goodbyes to my family. And I was so scared, and there was no one there I could talk to about how I felt at all. And the only private place that they really had in the hospital was the toilet. So I remember going there with my mum very vaguely, and I remember really sort of thinking that I'd sort of never see her again. And then, obviously, I was allergic to the thing, and then I flatlined. I died for a few seconds. I came back round, you know, sort of miraculously, I don't know. And I left the hospital, and a few days later the swelling went down, and yes, the physical scars healed, but the mental scars were still there. You know, what was I allergic to? What would cause this? What could I eat? What couldn't I eat? What was going on? You know, no one could give me those sort of answers, and I was becoming more and more withdrawn. I was starting to develop behaviours, avoidance strategies for food, strange little mannerisms. Like if I'd walk down the street, I'd have to clutch my collarbone, and I'd do this strange kind of chicken movement between things that I'd have to grab. And, you know, did anybody see me? Was I freaked out? You know, was I an oddity? And I became more and more reliant on my family, you know, and more, I didn't want to reach out to them. I felt so ashamed of what was going on. You know, I didn't know anyone who had mental health problems. So, in the end, I retreated into my work and started to make these pictures and put them up on eBay. You know, they were my way of coping, on my diary. But people didn't really see the anxiety at that point. But they really helped me through. And, you know, some of the things I got offered on the NHS were things like group therapies, a coping with fear group. And one lady was scared of cats, another one was scared of pigeons, and I was scared of life. And I was scared of the room, and, you know, it was hard just going there. But gradually, you know, I've learned through my art, I suppose, to come to terms with these things and to feel like I kind of need to look after myself and have a bit of responsibility for that. But I think, you know, we're here to talk about prejudice and discrimination, and, you know, so it's very easy to say, oh, you know, Stuart's this artist, he's done all this stuff, you know, he's fine, you know, he's got the most beautiful girlfriend, lovely kid, he lives in a nice house, people buy his art, you know, why on earth should he have an anxiety disorder? He should be fine, you know. It's not the better I've got with my career, the better I've felt in myself, you know. These things aren't associated, and I really think, you know, that we need, you know, no one's going to give us permission to talk about mental health, you know. I mean, 1 in 4 people in any given year will have a mental health problem, and that's a statistic that we hear quite a lot. But, you know, the way I look at it is that means there's 3 out of 4 people who are there who could help that one person, you know. And it's not just about talking about what we're going through. There's other ways, you know, we can ask people, how are you? How do you feel? Are you okay? And learn to listen to what they say to us. Because, you know, I had a friend come over the other day, and she might be watching this, I'm not going into too much detail, but I said, oh, how are you? And she said, oh, I haven't been to work for a couple of weeks. I said, oh, right, you know, you're unwell, what's going on? She said, oh, yeah, it's something with my head. You know, she knows what I do with the Mind charity and how involved I am in mental health, and she didn't feel she could talk to me about it in my own way. This is so strange, you know? And I do believe that the culture around this can change. I absolutely believe it, wholeheartedly. I mean, if this was the 70s, everyone would be smoking in this room. You can't imagine that now. You know, we can do it, but we have to make a decision to do it. You know, it's like that Gandhi thing, you know, we've got to be the change we want to see in the world. We've got to say, I'm not feeling very well. And I've started doing this, and I've faced huge discrimination. You try, you know, some art collector wants to take me to Nobu in his Ferrari, wants to buy a load of art. I feel I've got to go, so I might sell a picture, you know? And he orders me the black cod. He's going to order for me. I can't eat this. What if I'm allergic to it? What if I'm going to die? A massive panic attack. And I'm having to go and get my medication and end up in hospital. You know? Or you try and tell an art gallery, well, I can't come to the posh dinner after the show. You're not really wanted, you know, you're at arm's length. All of a sudden, your exhibition's kind of cancelled a little bit. So, you know, but I think, you know, what we see at Mind is, you know, the economic situation isn't making it any better. There's more and more people needing more and more help. And there's less and less services, you know, and there's more and more discrimination. And I think there's less and less choice over the sort of treatment you receive. You go to your GP, he says, well, I'll give you this, this, or this. You know, what if I think art therapy can help me? What if I want to dance? What if I want to talk to someone about it? So, you know, that's kind of my position on it.
Thank you very much.
You know, Stuart, I really appreciate your telling us your story and the vulnerability that you were able to express. And one of the things that I came to decide was that I was going to be 100% honest with my family history, the genetic propensity to this depression that lives in me and my sister and all of that. So, you know, I let my kids know everything. And what you described is very common. Most mental disorders happen around the first year of college, right? It's like they get born out around then. And my daughter Danny, who, I've got 4 children, and my daughter Danny is very vivacious, and I thought of all of my kids, she was the one that was going to dodge this, right? Well, she went off to college just like you, and she had an anxiety disorder, but she didn't smoke pot, and she didn't drink over it. She had the freedom to just ask for help. You know, she checked in, my wife dropped off her last suitcase, and 4 hours later she was on the phone crying for help. That Monday, having not even sat in a class, the counselor, the chancellor of the school said, this is happening all the time. This is a very acute case of anxiety separation. If Danny leaves now, we'll give you all of your money back. And that's what she went, got her money back. She went to a 2-year college the same day, took the classes that she would have taken, because what she said was, I said, Danny, the school's only 45 minutes away. And she said, it's not the same, Daddy. It's not like knowing that you were down the hall. She just wasn't ready. And now she's doing fine. And 3 out of my 4 kids are talking about their emotional distress when it comes out. You are as sick as your secrets. And if you hold those secrets in, they're going to manifest in rashes, or you're going to put on 80 pounds, or you're going to get sick. You are going to get sick from the secret you hold inside. You know, it's a guarantee.
One of the things that we really wanted to focus in on this evening, rather than perhaps explore what is the basis for any of the difficulties that any one of us might experience, there'll be lots of us in the room. I mean, we could all, well, many of us could get into swapping diagnoses or names or labels and try and extrapolate from that, well, what does this reflect? What does that say about me? What we're trying to address here this evening really is, well, how do we live in the world when our difficulties manifest? So let's for a moment not get into a discussion necessarily about what is the basis of that difficulty, but actually, how do we live in the world, or is there a way in which the world either does or doesn't accommodate us? And I suppose that then manifests in what we're talking about here, that experience of prejudice. I mean, you spoke about the kind of discrimination, as you see it, that you experience every day in your work. The fact that the world demands that you conform to a certain model of behaviour that actually for you is not healthy or helpful and is quite destructive for you. And that it's very difficult to simply name that fact and expect that that will be respected rather than judged or...
And how, I mean, your first thought is that it's going to cause trouble, you know, what are the consequences going to be? You know, if I speak out and say, actually I feel really, really wrong at the moment, something's going to go wrong, I'm going to lose something. I mean, but even as you were saying before, on a personal level, you know, I've been on having a panic attack or something, and I've thought 2 or 3 times about phoning my partner, you know.
Before you did it.
Yeah. It's not the first thing, oh, well, you know, it's deeper than that.
Then that's interesting, isn't it? Because it suggests that on some significant level we're responding to what we clearly respond to something that exists beyond ourselves, so that exists within society. If something inhibits us from being able to simply reach out and say, I'm struggling, we've internalized something.
Yeah, it's like we're already expecting there to be a lack of compassion there in response, you know.
I always remember, can you imagine though if we all did go around the world honestly answering the question, how are you?
Yeah.
I have a background, not many people might know about it, but I have a background, not just a personal background in this issue, but then some of a professional background in this issue where I trained as a psychotherapist. I can remember training with this amazing woman called Anne Gertie, who started off as a clinical psychologist here in Ireland, and she had the uncanny and just disturbing for a little while, and then just frankly irritating habit of answering the question. So very after she'd kind of stop and look at you, take about 2 or 3 minutes, and then start to tell you in great detail what she was. Which is really thought-provoking, but it does say something about how actually on one level we need to question how genuinely interested we are in each other. And we were talking a little bit earlier on, and I think both of you spoke about how yes, there's a need for us to speak out. I think you said it, Joey, actually. There's also a very significant need for us then to listen. So that speaking out can become... Do you want to say something about...
Yeah, when I was asked to take the film we're screening on Saturday, No Kidding You 2, to Iraq, the military had heard about the movie, had seen it, and had sanctioned it because they have a very big problem with suicide in the military. Over the last, 11 years of the war, there have been only 5,000 deaths due to battle, and there have been 65,000 suicides. So it's like every 70 minutes, a boy, and the suicides are occurring by Anglo-American males between the ages of 18 and 21, first tour of duty, first deployment, within the first 6 months. So the GIs I was talking to while I was there, you know, in talking about the feelings that they go home with, right? They said that when we tried to talk about this, and what the military is establishing, they're like battle buddies, that all you need is another human being to discuss how you really feel, and to be able to share with them. You know, the 1 in 3 people that you mentioned, that there are 3 people listening to your problem. What's really going to help is that those 3 people have gone through it. It's the basis of what the 12-step program is for alcoholics, that now that 12-step program has morphed into 400 types of 12-step programs. Schizophrenia Anonymous, Bipolar Anonymous, Dual Diagnosis Anonymous. You know, telling another person what it's like to be you, and the identification to the feeling. So these guys are saying, I just want them to listen. You know, I'm telling my brother what it was like in Iraq, and they're going, oh yeah, I have the same problem. You know, if you just listen and not say anything, by the time it's over, most of the time they've figured it out and they're thanking you for your help. And all you do is listen.
I think sometimes people find it hard to articulate what they're going through as well. You know, I certainly did. I couldn't have said it. You know, and that's where the art really helped me. And I think that, you know, that's why I believe so strongly in creative therapies. You know, because sometimes, you know, I did some work with victims of torture, and we've been through unbelievable experiences, and they come to England, and what they've been through by the time they get there, they don't feel like they belong, they feel sexually. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous, you know, how these people have been treated, and they don't have the mechanism. They can't walk into a doctor's surgery and say, I feel like this, or they can't say it to their friends necessarily. You know, maybe their culture doesn't allow that. But you find a way that they can produce something, some sort of art, you know, maybe acting, whatever, you know, we can start to work things out there. And I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to set up the creative therapies thing, you know, why not why it's so important for me.
It's interesting because you said that, and I completely agree with and understand what you're saying, that people can't necessarily say what they feel. But actually, the reality is that most people are constantly expressing something of how they feel, very often behaviourally. Now you're talking about taking that and doing it in a creative form. But isn't that another form of listening? If we can be present in and witness to somebody's expression, whether it's creative expression or whether it's verbal expression, there's an experience in that moment that allows a connection to happen, or allows perhaps, if I'm the person doing the expression, allows me to articulate something that ends a feeling of isolation and silence. I mean, when both of you were speaking, the word silence was coming through to me very, very strongly. that the feeling or the imposition of silence.
But it's
And the demand that the experience that we're having be silent. So for you, and the blocking card in Noble was fantastic, but that for you, you're not able to say, no,
actually, I can't eat that.
eat
Do you mind if I just sit here and have nothing?
Yeah.
I couldn't say. Yeah, it's that's the struggle that you have. If I could have said, oh, I don't fancy it, I probably wouldn't have had a panic attack that day. Right. It would have ended there and then. It's the not being able to.
But the thing is you're able to now. You've learned how to.
Well, I'm trying to.
You know, you've got coping mechanisms, so you know that you can say, I don't want the black card. You know, that's the thing is we learn, there are coping mechanisms to deter the issue. What I think is that we are all motivated by terror. We are all in this together. We are all fearful because life is a series of fearful events. Life is a series of pain and aggravation and anxiety. And so the best way to deal with that is to figure out that there must be a meaning in the pain. That life is so now when my depression comes, I feel it. I feel it. I let it come to me, and it's a wash, because this too shall pass. This too shall pass. And talking to another person that has your issue, that has time dealing with that issue.
But can we also create the space, Joey, to allow each other to be in whatever our individual experience is, whether that's a moment of distress or a moment of joy or a moment of anything else, whether that's a moment that for others might appear dysfunctional, but actually from your perspective is a rational, quite sane response to the experience of encountering a substance that
I know it, yeah.
So there's nothing irrational about an anxiety if you don't know that a substance might kill you, that it is. That's a rational response. And yet the societies that we live within doesn't tolerate, or you don't feel that society can tolerate that response from you, or that your explanation of that would be acceptable or tolerable.
Yeah, but I mean, you don't feel free to express it. I think that's my point. But you know, there's a variety of different things going on. I mean, my grandmother developed late onset schizophrenia out of the blue, almost overnight. And what was happening in her head was like some sort of movie, you know. And the world intervened. It literally knocked the door of her flat down with a battering ram and took her somewhere she did not know she was going. I mean, you know, when we talk about freedom, could she have looked after herself? No. Would she have probably harmed herself? Most probably. You know, and that's a very fine line, I think, when we talk about freedom and prejudice. You know.
And your view of what could, should, or might have happened there? What the response might have been?
I don't know. I didn't know the options. I mean, what was wrong was the lack of information that my family was given about what was going on. And actually, you know, there was no choice. You know, I didn't know. I don't think any of us did. You know, is she being looked after now? We hope so. But
I'm going to open it up. But before I do, one of the things that I just want to ask you, Joey, is you use the word, and I've seen you use it in print and in other places, and there's at times a distinction in how you use it. You use the word disease quite a lot. Now I've seen you use it in a way where that word is hyphenated. What's that about? Because
it's not disease. I'm not saying disease. I'm saying disease.
Okay.
You know, I feel dis-easy. I can't describe it. You know, I can give you a sound. You know, a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about tonight, I didn't know I felt that way. I didn't know I wanted to die. You know, in talking to my doctor, he said, you know, what your problem is, Joey, is to wake up in the morning and the first thought you have is, shit, I'm still here. Because what I really wanted to do was die. You know, I didn't want to have to go through another day with the same pain. And either the pain had to go away or I had to kill it by killing me. So I think that a lot of well-meaning organizations are compounding what is a human rights issue. That our brain doesn't have the same constitutional parity to other vital organs in our body. You know, that the minute you walk into an emergency room, and if you say that you have clinical depression or anything like that, they're going to treat you differently. They're going to want to get you out of there. If you're a cutter, and they see that, and they say, is that self, did you do that to yourself? They're going to let everybody know. They're going to write it on your chart and label you. Because we're all into labels. You know, you see somebody on the way home, you know, being active and talking loud, and you're saying they're crazy. But then you realize he's having a fight with his wife, and he's got a little earpiece on. He's on the cell phone. You know, so what we've got to do is we got to change everything. You know, we got to teach our children that are 4 and 5 years old, like we teach them hygiene when they go into school and learn how to brush their teeth. They need to learn that emotional differences, emotional brain styles are different, and that 75% of them will have to deal with an emotional style in the course of their lifetime, and it doesn't make you weird. In fact, it makes you special. It gives you creative arts. It makes, you know, whoever thought that my being crazy would make me a celebrity? Because I chose acting, I needed to find something to let my feelings out, you know? So, what was the question?
You've answered it, but it immediately, from that point of view, brings me on to you. I mean, there is something around the whole notion of creativity, and that people create, very often people create a link between, or they link creativity with mental or emotional suffering. And at times it seems to me that there can almost be a kind of a romanticization that can happen.
Yeah, I think, you know, art, I use histories because there's loads of them, but art histories are just littered with it. And you know, we're so prejudiced in our view of what art history is, and we've got Van Gogh, and he chopped his ear off, and he was this, you know, but there's a whole load of artists that make fantastic work that actually doesn't go to that place. I think it's this idea that our artists are going to walk to the edge of things, experience it, bring back the spoils of their problems and their travels and share it with us so we don't have to go there. That's the kind of idea. But I just don't think it really kind of washes, really. You know, we don't need our artists to do that. We need to do loads more than that. It's nice that some of them do. I mean, I appreciate Francis Bacon for doing it. But
you just don't want to be that guy.
Yeah, I'd rather not. I kind of have to get forced into it. I'd rather be the other one.
I'm glad that you do. I'm gonna open it up a little bit. We'll take some, now. What I want to do is take a couple of questions or comments in groups, and then we'll just try and make this a bit more fluid. So, show of hands, please, if you want to ask a question or make a comment. I have a gentleman there. Have anybody else? I feel like I'm auctioneering that. Somebody else. Gentleman just here.
I'd like to ask Joe, was he diagnosed with bipolar? The reason I'm asking is the creativity.
No, I wasn't. When the doctor did the research and the testing, he said that I had depression, and one of the I said, why is that? Because one of the byproducts of bipolar dis-ease, is if I said it was disordered, it would be forever. You know, with mental health, people say, I'm schizophrenic, I'm bipolar. They don't say, I'm cancer, they don't do that. You know, I'm a person first, and I have a style, you know, a learning style second. So I don't stay up late at night. I don't go on for days without sleep. That's why he said that.
What if I want to be prescribed art therapy, or what if I want to dance? What if I want to talk to someone about it? Stuart, you said that, and I was hugely touched, because I think one of the problems with mental health is sometimes you can feel crap, and you can be having a really bad day, and you can't talk to your friends about it, and you don't want to ring somebody like Amnesty or Concern or Smartens or Aware, because your problem isn't big enough. So I'm wondering if there's a space within the art community, if it is the art and theatre community, where someone can create a space that people can go to feel better about themselves. Because I think it's something that Dublin really needs. I know I find it very much sometimes. I'm blessed with great family, great friends, a great city, but I I don't feel that there's somewhere that I can go when I'm not feeling great.
And it then strikes me that what we need to do is create spaces where we can be.
But it's already there. It's, you know, I have it. I went to the concierge, the 12-step programs everywhere. You know, if that feeling is it manifesting that you're acting out behaviors, or you know, are you drinking too much, or you know, if you have a desire to be better, they take you with open arms. You know, it's the greatest thing that ever happened to me, and I go to 2 or 3 a day if need be. And
I think what Darren was also talking about, though, was a space to be. Not necessarily to be better, but to be happy, sad, depressed, alive, not whatever.
Yeah.
A space where we can actually allow. It's back to that question about how are you? Can we have a space where we can say how we are and just have that received or held or permitted? Is that?
Well, I think that would be, that's the goal, isn't it?
Yeah.
And, you know, how you get to that point is something else. I think, you know, one of the things is this Creative Therapies Fund that we've established at Mind that's launching in March. And we're looking to make creative therapy available through the local mind associations in England and Wales, and it doesn't really help you in Ireland, but you know, there's 160 of those, you know, and obviously funding is the issue and how much you can deliver, but you know, you start somewhere. But I know the first Fortnight guys are setting up a creative therapy kind of space. I think that's sort of the next phase for them. I don't think they've got it yet.
Before we go on to questions, then JP is just sitting there. So JP, if you want to say something about that, maybe JP spent the first one.
Yeah, we are. I'm just fascinated to hear you talk about it, Stuart. It's so welcoming to hear your contribution on it. And yeah, you're right. The language can get so loaded, but I suppose when we look for help, we need a menu. When we're ordering food, we need a menu. You know, there's one thing on the menu where some of us will like it, some of us won't. You know, that's why there's 10 things. And I think when we look for help, we need that too. We need a menu of options. Some people will be helped by a GP, some people will be helped by a therapist, some people will be helped by a therapeutic community. Others, you know, will be helped by something that harnesses that kind of creativity. And I think it's sorely lacking in the menu of options that's available in Ireland. And I suppose that was why we having established the festival primarily as a social change movement, and really that's what it is, to try and create the spaces that we're in now. And it's brilliant to be in this space, but I suppose the legacy we wanted to see for the festival and for all the work of our partners was to see that manifest itself into something different in what's available to you as an Irish person in distress or while looking for help. So that's where the idea of the First Fortnight Centre for Creative Therapies has come from. And it's amazing because we haven't talked about it and we haven't studied what Mind are doing. I know Mind haven't studied what we're doing, but it's interesting that at this point in time we're all coming to that same conclusion, that actually that different option needs to be available, that people will get better in the way that they feel comfortable getting better, that people will recover in the way that they feel comfortable recovering. And you know, I think it's whatever else we do, I think the thing that we're trying to prioritise is that dignity, that people get a dignified response and an available solution. So please consult the programme, it's on the first page, consult the website if you want to learn more about it, but we'd appreciate everyone's support in our endeavours to make that a reality.
Thanks, JP. I'm going to take a couple of questions from this side, and I'm going to take a few at once, and we won't respond. I know there's 1, 2, 3 people here waiting at the moment, so I'll take yourself first, then here, and then I'll come to you, John.
It's just in response to both Dara and Stuart and Peter, just to say that creative art therapy in Ireland, I am a creative art therapist, I know we have a couple of other kind of scattered around, that there is a strong community of creative arts therapists in Ireland. And it's been established for about the past 25 years, it's in its 25th year. But unfortunately, a bit like mental health, though, it makes some noise for creative arts therapists. If you need it and you want it, let your voice be heard. Because there's only so much fighting creative art therapists can say, you know, we're here, we're willing to help, we're willing to, you know, we've trained, we're masters, PhDs at this stage. But it's to put it out there a bit further and to ask your TDs, your doctors, to say this is needed, this is what we need as human beings. And I think there's just something extremely interesting to see someone from England and someone from America sitting in front of us. And there's something very childlike sitting here as Irish people going, what can you show us, what can we do, how can we learn from you? And I think it's just wonderful to hear Stuart talk about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, the question I'd like to ask is, what do the panel think, should there be more teaching in mental health matters when school children are young? Therefore, if you teach them young, it will change the perception of the way we speak about mental health.
Okay, thank you. And then John.
Just to pick up on the question that you asked earlier, so you asked how interested are we in each other, and Stuart, you mentioned about 1 in 4 people maybe experience mental health difficulty and 3 in 4 being there to potentially help, but quite often we don't see past our own short space or our own garden fence. So how can we encourage people to, and what can people do to be that 3 in 4 who can provide help and support? That's a very good question.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's an individual thing. I mean, because there's so many different things going on, and if you are one of the sort of 3 in 4, and one of your friends is in mental distress, that you're going to have to just talk to them and listen. I mean, it's going to be different every single time. But I think it's just about opening the dialogue. Like we're doing now, just making it comfortable for people to not expect that there's going to be some sort of negative response to articulating what they're going through. It's as simple as that, and we can change it straight away. We just have to start doing it. No one's going to legislate it, or it's all right to talk about. We just got to decide to do it. If we all just did it, it would be done.
And this gentleman's question then about the need for early interventions in schools, particularly, hey, you're banging on
about mental health.
It's been a big part of the focus of the work we've been doing over the last couple of years. And at the moment, I'm chairing a coalition called the Children's Mental Health Coalition, which is a strong focus on responses to children and young people, and indeed other colleagues from the sector who are part of the coalition here, or our units were part of the coalition here in the room as well. And for one of the things that we're saying, and you both have referenced it in different ways, we need to have conversations about mental health that are not about the concept of mental health from a mental illness perspective, but from the point of view of supporting positive mental health. And actually, we shouldn't even be using that phrase anymore, positive mental health.
It's mental wellness. It's being well, it's not...
Or that mental health can simply mean mental health, that it shouldn't automatically mean, in people's minds, that it's a negative, scary concept. And it strikes me that in that, it's really great that we might, in this conversation and other conversations, explore some of the different ways in which we can support here and be with each other. But that actually we also need to acknowledge that we will all require, that many of us may require very different approaches, and I think that's been referenced by a number of other people as well. And I'm a huge fan in lots of ways of creative therapeutic approaches, art therapeutic approaches and others, but I also know that for some people that's absolutely not something that... So we have to find the forms of expression and support that people can access. I passionately believe, personally, in the use of creativity as a way of exploring distress or discomfort, but that what we have to provide is lots of different ways in for people. And your final point about going, if we decide that it will happen, then it must happen, speaks, I think, right to the heart of what we're trying to address here this evening. There's a reason why mental health in this country was seen as something that was, for a very long time we've talked in Amnesty and with other colleagues in the sector about trying to make mental health a political priority. It is, at least it's articulated as such at the moment now, and we've come that far. But the reason why it wasn't was because not enough of us demanded that it would be. I mean, we live in a Republican democracy. We live in a country where, political action reflects public opinion. There was a reason why successive governments were able to ignore mental health. There was a reason why Ireland locked up more people than any other country on the face of the planet. It's because we tolerated and supported that view. Because when somebody's behaviour or health status or life circumstances manifested something that was uncomfortable for us, we didn't want to deal with it, so we disappeared them. That's the society that we come from, and that's what we absolutely have to start to challenge as well, I think. That's part of what this evening is about. Gentlemen, just here.
Yeah, the title of this discussion this evening, Please Can We Make Some Noise for Mental Health? I'd like to make my own little bit of noise. And my first comment is directed towards you, Colm, as chairman, and then mostly to Joey. You mentioned at the start about the statistics about discrimination, and that's true, like that's very sad. But you did say that we shouldn't focus on the reasons for people having actually difficulties. Well, I consider that as an attempt on your part, and you can explain this, and just let me finish, to try and censor the discussion, because I think it is important to actually look at the reasons why people have the difficulties. And I'm just going back to an interview that was in the Irish Times yesterday, when Joey was quoted as saying that the best thing that ever happened to him was the day that he received his diagnosis of bipolar. I consider labels to be dehumanising, they're disempowering.
Well, I was just quoted,
We'll let him
respond. Because if a doctor, as was told to me, tells you you have a chemical imbalance, that actually removes the incentive for you. And I actually believe labels are very stigmatising. And I actually object to, as you mentioned, Joey, and a lot of psychiatrists do, the whole thing is that if you suffer from depression, you take an antidepressant. If you have diabetes, you take insulin. Because you said, and I'm just quoting from the Irish Times again, you can correct that if you're misquoted, but the day that I received my diagnosis of bipolar, 2 weeks before my 21st birthday, was the worst day of my life. And if I hadn't met Ivor Brown in my late 20s, when he took me off the lithium, that I was told I'd be on for the rest of my life, I wouldn't be alive today. So I object to all this thing about mental illness. I prefer to use the term emotional distress.
Okay, you answer first.
well, we vehemently agree with each other, because I object to the term mental illness, and what I call it is brain disease, right? So BD for short. I never said I was bipolar, but I did say, and the quote was that the greatest thing that ever happened to me was being diagnosed with depression, because now I have all the tools, and medication is just a little bit of it. You know, it's not only that. It's everything that I do in the course of the day to have peace of mind. That's what I meant.
And in relation to censoring the discussion, I wasn't seeking to censor the discussion. The point of this discussion this evening, this discussion is about addressing the issue and experience of prejudice. I absolutely agree that the ongoing discussion about the whole question of diagnosis, of treatment forms, of the medicalisation, of distress, these are really vital, important conversations, and we have to have them, and we have to keep having them. And I've had them personally and professionally, lots of those, and that's something that I personally want to see us continue to do in this country. I think we absolutely have to do it. We have to be able to hear each other in it. My point about not getting into that conversation tonight was not to censor it. That's not what tonight's discussion was about. The theme of tonight's discussion was the whole notion of prejudice and individual attitudes, and how they are a barrier to people being able to express or articulate their needs and have those needs responded to. Yeah, so it's not to say that first of all, it's certainly not to try to either limit the discussion or to promote a particular model of intervention or response.
But my point is that the psychiatric system of labelling people is actually stigmatising in itself. Because
I don't disagree with you.
So that's why I brought.
And personally, I don't disagree with you. I mean, I've had diagnoses myself, and I never refer to them because they're absolutely meaningless from my personal perspective. They mean nothing and say nothing about me, and they certainly didn't assist me at times in my life when I was experiencing distress or difficulty. Others needed them so that they could contextualise what was happening to me, or so that other systems could respond to what was happening to me. But they had no meaning to me and they didn't define me, so I've never ever used those labels because I find them profoundly unhelpful. That's just from a personal perspective. But as I say, that wasn't the point of this evening's conversation, so it wasn't an attempt to shut down that conversation. It's a vital one. It's just not the discussion that was the format for this evening's conversation. And hopefully Joey's been able to clarify what he means by the way that he uses that concept or the word dis-ease.
Yeah, thank you very much to the panel. Very good, very interesting. I'm wondering, what about people with mental health problems, right? Who won't accept that they have a problem. They won't take treatment, they won't take help, they refuse to accept there's anything wrong with them, and they won't take medication. Do they have the right to say, I don't want any of that, even if they definitely have a problem? or it's a difficult one, and I'm just wondering what the panel thinks about the person who won't accept it.
Okay. And then there's a gentleman here. Sorry.
I just want to ask the two lads, when they sort of were coming to terms with their illnesses or the disease, as you said, Joey, were there people whose support would surprised you initially, and then were there people whose support you thought you could rely on who didn't support you?
I've never had someone not support, if anything, the first time I went to Washington to lobby for equal rights for our brain, what I found was the senators and congressmen on those days occasionally brought their wives or husbands because of the personal issue that they were having with their children and wanted to hear what I had to offer.
Stuart?
I don't know. I don't know if I really expected anyone to act in any particular way, but I have been shocked sometimes by just, because I believe everybody's quite compassionate at heart. I like to believe that, but I've had instances a few weeks ago where I was on the train and I was having a really bad anxiety attack and I dropped all my belongings everywhere and I was like the crazy guy on the train that everybody kind of wanted to avoid, and I was shocked that nobody reached, "Are you all right? Can you give your hand with that?" So I've sort of noticed that. I'd expect more of that, but maybe I'm just...
Well, look at that haircut.
Yeah.
There speaks the man of the funny. And on the question of, on that question of whether or not how people respond to an outside suggestion that they need a particular kind of treatment.
Well, I suppose that's a similar thing to what we went through with my grandmother, wasn't it? That some sort of intervention happened and she had no choice in the matter, and she had her choice. She'd locked herself in a flat and been safe from whatever was going on. I don't know. I'm still wrestling with that idea. I can't work it out, if I'm honest.
Joey? Anything to say on that concept, on whether or not people have the right to refuse treatment?
The thing that I was thinking is that we are entitled to our personal misery, and that from what I've learned is that you can't get help if you don't want it. And in my case, that I had at that time the gift of desperation, that I was desperate to try to get this feeling, to be able to enjoy things that I used to enjoy, that be able to feel my wife's love and my children's love, that what I had done to myself unknowingly and wittingly is that I was numbing the pain, and I couldn't compartmentalize this pain. So I started numbing everything. I numbed my joy, my pleasure, my happiness. And through the therapies, I learned that when I didn't want help, that I could put on my sneakers and walk for 20 minutes, and that's the equivalent of 20 milligrams of Prozac. Or go see a funny movie and not watch the news. Instead, watch Abbott and Costello get Frankenstein. I can get my misery back anytime I want.
The concept of we all have a right to our misery. It is actually a particularly live discussion in Ireland at the moment, because as I'm sure many of you will be aware, there's work ongoing at the moment around Ireland's approach to capacity legislation. Exactly that question of if we're operating within a system where there are the kind of levels of prejudice that we've already spoken about, how does that then work its way through to how our systems, be they legal or medical or otherwise, respond to people who are experiencing particular kinds of difficulties? And it's why, for instance, we've been doing a lot of work over the last number of years on the whole issue of capacity legislation to try to make sure that the state appreciates that it has an obligation, rather than to decide what's right for somebody in a set of circumstances, instead to do everything it possibly can to identify what would the wishes of that person be, or what are the wishes, or what would the wishes of that person be if they're in a position to articulate those wishes before they impose treatment on an individual. So that's the approach that human rights law would now require, that the last resort in any intervention is to impose a treatment on an unwilling recipient. That instead, we should, as individuals, have a right, as we would in any other area of health, to decide whether or not we want a particular treatment. And if there's an argument that suggests that we don't have the capacity, the legal capacity because of our health problem, in deciding whether or not that's right for us, that simply can't be a reason to enforce treatment without interrogating what are the preferences of this individual before a treatment is imposed, if you know what I mean. So that the responsibility is always, the obligation on the state, the service provider, is always to determine what will this individual want. What is this person's will and preference? What historically has been the will and preference? Do we have, for instance, an advance directive that sets out the kind of treatment that this person might want to receive in the event that they experience a particular health problem at some point in their life? And those have to be the ways in which we begin to work. That we don't have and continue to have a very paternalistic approach to treatment that says simply because your particular illness can be defined as a mental health problem, you now lose the right to decide whether or not, or lose the right to decide how you will be treated as a consequence of that. The gentleman at the back.
I just wanted to ask Stuart and Joe, would it be fair to suggest that you guys are people to ask, do you consider yourself quite lucky to have your children art forms in your life to help people manage and kind of resolve their issues?
Yeah, I mean, thank God I've got my heart. You know, I can't, I don't know what would have happened to me if it wasn't there. And, you know, I speak to a lot of people who have mental health issues who have an art form as well, and they say the same thing. You know, time and time again, I'll meet people who create art as some sort of catharsis, and they literally say, you know, it sort of saved their life. And I think it did with me. I had nowhere else to turn but that piece of paper. And yeah, absolute blessing. I'd be lost to it.
Yeah, 100%. When you come to see the movie on Saturday, there's a point where I asked a psychiatrist at McLean Hospital, did I make myself crazy because of the way that I was trained as an actor in using my, unresolved emotional pain? And what he said was, no, on the contrary, what you did is you sublimated, which is the highest form of evolution. You sublimated a craft where you could take these unresolved feelings and they had a place to go and they could work through the characters I was playing. So yeah, absolutely.
Kind of following on from that, Joey, given your career, what's your view of how people who experience mental health problems are represented generally, for instance, in the movie industry, in movies? Or do you have a view?
I think, this is my own, I think that Hollywood is where the sickest people wind up. I think that it's the only place that will tolerate this kind of behavior, and the evidence is absolutely in of the ones that are so talented that they extinguish their own lives through accident or abuse, are the ones that get everything that they ever want and then, systematically give it all back, by behaviors or saying things where they give it all back. So as I like to say, an asylum is, anybody can have an asylum. All you need is an empty room and the right kind of people.
This is just in relation to treatment preferences. Different things work for different people, and that's great, and that should be allowed. And art therapies in different forms coming out. But I have noticed somewhat of a negative backlash against psychiatric treatments recently. I was just wondering how you guys felt about that.
I'm not aware.
Just recently I've come across different quotes maybe against psychiatric treatment completely in favour of other treatments?
Well, no, I mean, I've heard stories where it works very well. I mean, I don't know, you might know.
Wow, we're going to really open up that one this evening with how long to go. Let's put psychiatric up for debate. Psychiatry generally up for debate for the last half hour of the evening would be in serious difficulty trying to get to the end of the evening. I think that there
our opinion.
You're not going to stop until I go.
Because I kept staring at him. Our opinion of psychiatric treatment is based on what the movies tell us what we should think. You know, one of the reasons why when I'm diagnosed for 10 years is because I saw One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I saw Sybil. You know, I didn't see people. You know, but my mother didn't see people. You know, so, you know, I didn't drink like the guy in The Lost Weekend. I mean, how could I be an alcoholic? I only drank white wine spirits occasionally. So, you know, so it's like movies, they dramatize or they villainize what mental disease treatment is, like shock treatment, right? Jack Nicholson and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But if you talk to the guy that ran the hospital at the time, what they were acting out was the kind of treatment that was happening in the 1800s, because in the middle 50s and early 60s, they were already giving muscle relaxants, so there would never be any opportunity for a guy to violently shake like that.
We're never going to get out of this room if we start talking about ECT. That's all right.
Hi, first of all, thank you both of you for being so open, and I have learned so much tonight. I did not even know there was such a thing as creative art therapy before I came here tonight. A couple of things I suppose I wanted to say. First of all, when you were reading out the statistics column, I was ashamed, I have to say. I have 4 small children. No one ever asked me what my views on would be if there was somebody in their class who had and I don't want to even use the word mental health problem, issue, illness. I'm not even sure what the correct terminology is. So that was my first feeling of shame and, oh my God, we have to do something. And the second thing was, I think both of you maybe, and maybe you especially, Stuart, I think you understand that you have the gift to be able to give those of us in the room maybe who are the 3 out of the 4 of having processed the position that you're in, and you have a fantastic vocabulary and you have a fantastic turn of phrase, and I think I've had 20 eureka moments here going, Jesus, that's exactly what I meant, oh my God, because you're putting the words, and Stuart, I think the same, you know, I kind of went, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, and coming back to Amnesty, then in terms of the role here, you know, and I've been a member of Amnesty since I was in first year in college, is that, you know, there's so much that we just don't know about this. And it doesn't have to be an emotive campaign. I mean, this is very powerful. But I love the idea of the menu, you know, that sometimes we are so inarticulate that we can't express what we want to say. But when someone says it for us, we can say, Jesus, that's exactly what I meant. He, you know, not even that he gets it, and not even that, you know, I have this week a story to tell about my own personal journey, because I don't, and I'm lucky, but I'm not smug enough to believe that it won't happen to me next week or the week after. But, you know, it's very powerful in the way that you just think you're telling a story, but you've processed it, and the little isms, I'm scribbling furiously here, you know, they're so wise, and maybe that's something then that Amnesty can do, because we're good at that. You know, we're good at saying, you know, these are options. And even, I'm sorry, just to finish up and come back to the statistics, I'd be interested to know what the definition of mental health was. Because I wouldn't have asked, I would never have occurred to me that, you know, somebody that I saw on a train station who dropped all his stuff might just be, and I'd like to hope I'd stop and say, can I help you? But otherwise maybe I wouldn't, maybe in a rush that day and I wouldn't. But I wouldn't have occurred to me that that was in that box.
Yeah.
You know, so there's a whole education here that we haven't a clue, you know, I mean, we just don't, as a society, we just don't know.
Orla.
Hi, Orla Barry. I just want to make a comment on the issue of psychiatric treatment and come back to it. And I work with mental health reform, and we talk to people around the country, and what tends, a very common statement is people saying, I want more than simply an offer of medication. And I think the problem is that where the funding, or in some way in Ireland, what we see as being the service that is offered is actually a very limited service, and that it is mainly about medication. And that even if you look, say, at our multidisciplinary teams at the moment, creative therapists aren't included in the group of different professionals that are involved. So I would hope that, like, a message from this evening is that the need for different opportunities, the need for the inclusion of creativity as a therapy is something that I would hope that the psychiatric services would take on board into the future.
Thanks, all. Gentlemen, just here, and then I'm going to come to you.
Yeah. Some interesting points have come up here tonight. I'm over 30 years involved with groups. There seems to be a lack of knowledge on the different levels of depression. I would say the vast majority of the people in the groups that I've been associated with morning depression, unable to get out of bed for hours and hours. The psychiatric profession would prescribe biochemical medication for a biochemical imbalance. The psychotherapist will want therapy, counselling will want talking. So we have all these professionals having their own views. I think each individual has to say, okay, this will give me a better quality of life. There's only one way to find out. After a breakdown in '77, I was diagnosed with what's called manic depression, so-called. And for 20 years, I lived with the symptoms and I took my medication. But for 17 years now, I'm not going to know how I improved the psychiatric profession along. They told me I was on chemical medication for life, there was no cure. I'm free for 17 years of symptoms and medication. But I would say a little white pill has its place. But as a given test, it can be overprescribed.
Thanks very much. And I do think it's really important to acknowledge in this conversation that in Ireland we have had real difficulties in how psychiatric services have been provided and in people's experience of care or treatment within Irish psychiatric services. That is a very real issue. It's why we got involved in the work that we've been doing since 2003. So we do need to properly and fully acknowledge that. And just like yourself, there are other people in the room I know who feel very, very strongly that their path to recovery began when they stepped beyond the prescribed medical model of treatment, and that model of treatment did not work for them and in many ways was counterproductive. And equally, we also know, and Orla, you've talked about it quite a lot as well, that actually in how we've organised and constructed services here in Ireland, even the state acknowledges that some of the interventions that we put in place are counter-therapeutic. I mean, just reference the mental health inspector's comments on the regular placement of children in adult psychiatric wards. He described them as counter-therapeutic. So let's be clear, our psychiatric system in Ireland has an established history of responding to people's needs in a way that is counter-therapeutic, counter to their recovery and well-being. And that's an established fact. And yes, people have very, very different experiences, and yes, people need different interventions at different times. That's a fact. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The lady just here.
I just want to make 2 points. First, I won't dwell on it. It's about when you go to your doctor's office, it's usually the first person you go to. And when you go to his office, his or her office, they have an effector mug, an industrial pen, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist or paranoid, but I know that, like, people or whoever go to the doctors and they sell their products, and doctors then sell them on. So first of all, they might not be getting proper medical treatment with drugs. And secondly, I think that there's prejudices and everything between people with different mental health problems, because you say if like there's 3 out of 4, okay, but 2 out of 4 of them are going to experience depression at some stage in their life. So how can they judge someone else based on that? I mean, I've been treated for depression for 12 years, but if I had a child and they were in a class and someone would say brain out, like, hey, you know, be careful around that kid, kind of, you know. So even I'm admitting to being judgmental about that. So that's something as well that I think has to be addressed.
Yeah, and we all judge that which we do not understand. We're all anxious or fearful of something that we don't understand. It's back to the concept of the gentleman there suggested that we need more and more interventions in schools and in early life. That really we're talking about mental health education as much as mental health intervention as being really important tools where we can combat the kind of prejudice that exists, but also then make it more possible for people to voice their experience or voice their need for support, never mind access to support, if God help us, that actually exists. The lady just here, and then who else with a hand up, because I'm just watching it, and then I know Hazel, I missed you like crazy there, sorry. The lady just up there.
Yeah, just a question for Joe, just going back to the representation of mental illness in TV and film, which I think is a really, really interesting point. You worked on Sopranos, featured arguably the toughest male character on TV, Tony Soprano, who had mental health problems, as with many of his family. I just wondered, was that, when you were working on it, was that reassuring anyway to see that storyline, to see that being brought so mainstream, such an unexpected character? I don't know, did you like that? Did it?
You know, I didn't notice. I didn't know there was anything wrong with me at the time. You know, and I didn't think that taking me 8 to 12 Vicodin a day was a problem either. You know, what I was doing, you know, ultimately, is I was treating. I wasn't even getting the buzz off of this stuff. You know, I was taking it because if I didn't, I'd be sick. What No Kidding Me Too, or what our goals is as an organization, is to educate humanity about the discussion of brain disease. If you have something that's this easy, that you should talk about it openly and seek treatment and become, you know, well, you know, even a greater member of society. You know, that the idea that we want to make the discussion of mood disease sexy and trendy and as popular as the discussion of erectile discussion. You know, I just said that wrong. You know, you got an American senator getting, you know, $5 million to say that he can't get a hard-on. You know, and it's okay, it's accepted. But it's not accepted to talk about your emotional state. The answer to this is emotional intimacy. That we can talk about how we feel freely and not fear, you know, not be judged.
Thanks, Colm. I'm assuming that you're using the word crazy just now, wasn't pejorative? Sorry, Dr. Colm.
Did I use the word?
Yes, you did. You said Hazel sitting there going slightly crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody knows him completely.
Well, maybe you are. That would be okay.
Slightly
okay.
Crazy. Just in the middle of all this discussion of, sorry, we have met before, we're not just slagging each other across the room. Just in the middle of
I have no idea who she is. I was obviously right.
Just in the middle of the discussion about labels and therapy and pharmaceuticals and everything else, there's a wonderful word that Stuart used earlier, and I just want to pull the focus back to it, and that was the word witnessing. And I think witnessing can be incredibly powerful, both for the person who's on the receiving end of it and for the person who's giving it. Because if I am, say for the 3 out of 4 people who aren't having an emotional difficulty at the time, if I can go to somebody or go to a space and know that the pain that I'm in will just be witnessed and not judged, and the other person will not feel that they have an onus on them to fix me, or cure me, or find out what's wrong with me, or put a label on, or rummage around inside and pull out the thing that it is and put a word on it. That's hugely empowering for everybody, and it's just that I'm a huge champion of it, as you can probably tell, and it was just that I was worried that it might get lost, the notion of witnessing, so that's why I just wanted to bring the spotlight back on it. So thanks for that.
Yeah. It's very good.
Thanks very much. the gentleman behind you.
And this is a question for Joe, just on some of the remedies, very useful. I heard say yoga and walking, and I just didn't get the other two.
12-step practicing the 12-step program, and having somebody in my life that I can trust to talk about, learning how to pause, right, and count to 10, and does it need to be said? Does it need to be said by me? Does it need to be said at all?
Lady just
there should be Oscars for grades on people's differences, maybe. What I think is very important is that there should be a place for parents to learn more, and it should be, I mean, here in this country, Catholics have to get marriage guidance before they get married. When we're having children, there should be a place that parents learn more so that they can encourage their children to talk openly and to talk about their feelings.
Thank you very much.
Stuart mentioned the word compassion.
Yeah.
I think that's gone missing in schools especially, and I feel children have an innate sense of compassion, and if it's encouraged and developed, I feel then there will not be discrimination and there will not be prejudice, because I feel when that goes missing, everything is missing.
Yeah.
That's my view, and I feel in terms of mental health that I think a lot of the problem that I am a creative arts therapist that I come across sometimes, they don't have that compassion from their parents or their teachers, and that's why the mental health, not everyone, but a lot of mental health problems that they come up with are because of that.
That they're looking for that.
Exactly. So my thing would be to have them to be compassionate towards that child that didn't get compassion, and they recovered.
Really?
Now, they don't know it would be different degrees, it wouldn't be all mentally or emotionally suffering.
There's a man up there, I think he was talking about there should be more work done in schools, but that is changing. I'm involved in Galway with a charity called Hospital Mental Health, and we went to secondary schools and do programs with transition year students in the whole area of mental health, and we deal with all topics including suicide. And this woman here mentioned about parents, I agree with her totally. I was actually talking to somebody at the weekend who has children in second level education, and I can't remember now the name of the organisation, and this is in Westport, and they do these programs with the children, but they also involve the parents. So things are actually changing in that regard.
Thank you very much.
Just a few points. One is when you spoke about capacity a while ago, I thought it was interesting that there is a lot about capacity, I believe, around the people who don't have a mental disease but are end of life things. I want to, I've got a physical disorder, but now I want to end my life. And I didn't realise there was so much about when people have mental disorders or disease, that there's something about it. In your research, absolutely, I concur with the lady over here. I thought it was interesting that those statistics are there based on, it'd be very interesting to know how mental health or mental disease is defined at all in this country, because it seems like everybody's put into one box, and therefore all treatments are in the one box. I look at Joey and I think you must have had the best doctor in the world, because they're certainly able to understand about mental health. I think in schools, I think it's great that charities coming in, but we can see from the government this year, I was reading there about, there was 417 or 16 jobs that money was supposed to be given to for the services here in Ireland, and 16 of those jobs were given in Ireland this year. So it shows how high it's on our agenda when we're looking at, and then I think from the schools as well, there's the thing about we've had physical education for donkey's years, but nothing about mental education. And I think it's going back to, yes, where do we start? What are the definitions? What are we talking about? And is mental dis-ease not the norm as opposed to contentment and happiness, because we seem to have more of one or the other, and we have to hide it.
Or rather, can it not be the norm for all of us at various stages in our lives? I guess is part of what you're saying. On the whole question of how mental health is defined, I'm not sure about the NDA. Somebody else in the room might know, and if you do, please indicate. Well, when we talked about the Amnesty research, this was about people's own reported experiences. So the research was carried out with 300 people who themselves reported that they had experienced mental health difficulties, and then they reported on their experience of prejudice, or as they saw discrimination from other people's treatment of them, of other people's responses to them. So it was very much self-reported in how people reported themselves.
Sorry, just briefly to go back to the issue in relation to somebody who's unwell, they should be sort of stepping into a situation of compelling them to take treatment, and that difficult decision to be made. If the person is a potential harm to themselves or perhaps to others, does that change things, or how do you look on that? And just maybe very briefly, something you mentioned, Joe, in passing was reference to secrets, which probably most of us are thinking on an individual level in that regard, and that it may cause toxicity of some type and that it manifests in some other way. There's a sense that Ireland has a very high level of mental illness, and that we have a collective sort of trauma, partly colonialisation, famine, and that probably still is there and probably is not focused on to the degree for all sorts of reasons that it perhaps should be.
I found a book that was very helpful to me in terms of cultural, because when I was working on myself, I asked my doctor that it have anything to do with being Italian, and the writer, a philosopher, Eckhart Tolle, he wrote a book called Power of Now, Awakening to a New Beginning. And in it, he talks about pain body and how culturally that some of us, it's like what my doctor told me, that this familiar misery that was living inside of me, it was difficult to have the unfamiliar happiness. I never knew what happiness felt like. I couldn't define it. I knew what misery felt like because it was in my life so much. And it made me feel alive, So you could read that. And then the statistics and definitions, the SAMHSA organization in the United States, SAMHSA, substance abuse, but they're terrific in doing studies. One of the studies they did 2 years ago is that people with a mental disease will die 25 years younger than those without, because of, and it's not from having mental uneasiness, it's more about you're smoking, like my mother. My mother smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day. She drank coffee with 9 sugars. And sugar has a big part in the way we feel and act.
It's interesting, but I suppose with that last point in particular, that notion of some level of collective societal trauma that finds an expression. Well, I mean, at the most basic level, that makes an awful lot of sense, doesn't it? Because we are as a society and as individual members of society the inheritors of all that has come before. So our lived experience is based upon, or how we live is based on how we have learned to live and how we pass that learning down across generations. And if you combine that with a society that has a great propensity for secrets, and has had since the foundation of the state a desire to pretend that all is well, even while all clearly isn't, and then quite a violent response to people who don't manifest wellness, where we institutionalise or disappear them or brutalise them further. So we're both, in many ways, I think, and this is a personal view, obviously, I say it very quickly to my Amnesty colleagues in the room, we're very much a brutalised society that has yet to realise the extent and the degree of our brutalisation, and we're going to learn how we can move beyond it. We're in some ways a people who describe themselves as compassionate, but who seem completely unable to display that same level of compassion towards ourselves as individuals, and then from that place to other people. Because actually, most of the time, that desire that exists to suppress another person's expression of their unwellness, disease, distress or discomfort is because we don't want to have to deal with it, because it challenges us to confront our own, and we're terrified to do that. And we're terrified that we won't be allowed to do that. We don't allow ourselves to be unwell. And it's one of the things that was running through my mind all the time as we heard about these different responses and this demand to move towards wellness. Well, of course, at the most basic level, life desires to be positively expressed, to be well, whatever that means. But shouldn't that be something that we provide the environment within which that happens, rather than an aggressive demand that we place or impose on the other? that actually sometimes the notion of bearing witness, or the notion of compassion or real love, is to be able to sit with somebody and allow them to be in their distress and not require them to stifle, silence, manipulate, change, or say everything is grand so that we're comfortable somehow in it.
Colm, that needs training. I spent 4 years learning to do that, and I think people are, are not able, because most families are saying, go to the doctor, go to the counsellor, but no one has said to them, you can listen if you can, if you can acquire skills. And I think that's so important to have parents and teachers and that, to have those skills just to be there. It's an amazing skill.
But it also requires a society that's prepared to listen, and a society that's prepared to witness and hear what's being said. And we've had some of that this evening from our two panelists, but also from you who've contributed. We've had people talk about an experience of challenging a perception from a medical model that said this is who you are, to going, well, no, actually this is who I am and this is how I'm going to be well for myself or in other ways.
Yeah, but generally speaking, a lot of parents still feel the doctor is the only person. There is that fear that they can't do anything and that they're helpless. I know that from my own. I live in the country, and that's always still going around. The doctor knows best.
Doesn't that then really also speak of where we started from? The prejudice that exists towards anything that's a manifestation of distress, dis-ease,
it's a fear,
or discomfort. But then all prejudice is based on, I suppose, a level of fear or anxiety or concern. And but the reality then is, and I suppose our collective experience in this country is that we punish people for their distress.
We were always punished through history, like famine. We were put in, locked up, then we locked up our own. It has a historical story.
That doesn't make it right.
It doesn't make it right, but it
doesn't make it acceptable.
That's why we need help to train people to be different in schools, parents. There's an awful lot of training because of that.
Well, on that note, that gives me an opportunity to allow both of our speakers to maybe wrap up, and then I might say something, because I do think that evenings like this evening, where we have this conversation and we get to a point where perhaps we see some of the things or attitudes that we need to challenge within our society, where we say that yes, that may be where we've come from, but it's not okay, and how do we take that forward and deal with this or address this in a different way, is a moment where real change starts to happen. I'd invite either of you, one of you, both of you, at any point, just maybe to make some concluding comments, and then we'll wrap up.
Well, yeah, what I was thinking is it happens one person at a time. That if you see any kind of piece in me, and you want what I have, then it's available to you too. The only way that I'm able to keep this peace of mind is by giving it away. I don't get to keep it unless I give it away. And I think the answer to all of this is to help another person, to love another person as you would, it's hard to say love yourself, because I didn't love myself for a very long time. But, to have a power that you believe in, that I choose to call God, and to ask that power for help when I can't handle it myself. That I surrendered a long time ago, realizing that I'm completely powerless at everything I do. That things happen for me, they don't happen to me.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's just about being human beings, really, and appreciating that other human beings are in different situations than ourselves. If we can help in some way, then we need to start doing it. And we're all pretty much in the same situation. We're here for a few years on this lump of stuff flying through space, and some of us are, having a harder time of it than others. And we should just start to be there for each other and stop expecting someone else to step in and fix it, and just start doing something. And step by step, we'll get where we need to be for each other.
Sounds like a good place to stop for me. I want to thank both of our panellists, Stuart and Joey. I think it's been a really engaging conversation. I want to thank you for being such a big part of it. I have a couple of things to remind you about. One is that there is a suggested donation towards the cost of this evening of €5. You're very welcome if you can at all to make that contribution as you leave this evening. There's also merchandise available. Joey's film, No Kidding Me Too, and Joey's book is available outside. There are First Fortnight t-shirts available outside. And I'm also, of course, need to mention the screening of No Kidding Me Too at the Sugar Tub at 3 p.m. This Saturday. And again, there'll be a Q&A session with Joey after that. And tickets are available for that, I think, at €8 each. Thanks very much indeed for coming this evening. Just as a final comment from me, it's always tempting to say that if we can simply discover the capacity to hear each other and to witness to bear witness to each other's experience and simply to allow that to be, we'll find a very positive way forward. And I think in most cases that's absolutely true. And yet we also know that there are times when our struggle is so significant that we need much greater intervention. The reality is that for most of us who will experience a level of mental health difficulty in our life, we will recover, and we can recover if we're given the compassion, the support, the love, the care, the consideration, well-resourced and well-situated within our communities, within the places where we live, that allow us to continue with our lives rather than experiencing interventions that effectively are destructive to our lives at a time when we need our lives supported rather than pulled asunder. We know that that's a significant step forward. Mental Health Reform's work in that area to try to make sure, as we've been doing with them over the last couple of years, that finally in Ireland we move to a model of mental health services that meet people's individual real needs in their lives in a way that allows them to recover their lives, recover their well-being, and live in the way that they wish to live is a crucial part of all of that. But we also have to be careful not to romanticize the fact that at times in our lives we also may well need other kinds of interventions as well, and that those interventions will be necessary and also have to be provided. I'm not quite sure what the point I'm trying to make there is, other than I felt that it was important to say it. I think in conversations like this, as we acknowledge that there's a broad range of responses that we need and that our human experience is our human experience and will have much in common with the experience of others, it also has, at times, enormous difference in divergence, and the responses that we put in place really have to be not so prescriptive and much more open, perhaps to addressing that at the individual level. I'm going to shut up now. Thank you very, very much indeed for coming along.